if I knew how to. There we go. Well, welcome today. I am very glad to be joined by Lieutenant Ryan Smithies with the Hurricane Hunters, who, of course, with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, which 403rd Wing in Keesler Air Force Base. And I just wanted to say before we get started, we've had all kinds of technical problems this morning, so I'm trying to get my bearings back a little bit. I would obviously never make a good pilot because I do not stay calm under pressure, but I do appreciate you joining me today, Lieutenant Smithies. It's amazing how something as absolutely intricate and scientific and incredible started from a dare in a bar, I guess. I don't know. Where somebody asked Lieutenant Colonel Joe Duckworth during World War II to go fly, if he could fly into a hurricane, and he did. And when he landed and survived, the weather officer said, "Hey, can you take me back up there?" And it's literally something that has turned into a huge lifesaver began that day. And I want to thank you for joining me because y'all been incredibly busy this year. I mean, we're already into the Greek alphabet on storms, and you know, here we are coming up on the end of hurricane season, and it's showing no signs of slowing down. So welcome aboard.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been busy for sure.
Yes, it has. You guys, not only are we into the Greek alphabet, which means that, you know, last year I was kind of looking at your number of hours that you flew, and y'all were busy last year. This year has been obviously off the charts. We're a record-breaking year, and your area of coverage goes everywhere from pretty much Hawaii out into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So you're having to cover a lot of territory, and you know, when you have two actual storms in the Gulf of Mexico at the same time, I mean, it's keeping you busy. Tell us a little bit about that, because not only are you having to fly a lot of missions, but you've had to evacuate as well this year.
Yeah, that's been one of the biggest challenges I think that we've faced this year. We can take a busy season, and every season's different, but when you start adding multiple storms at one time and then having to evacuate home station, that can really complicate things. Trying to send crews in different locations. You've got people worried about their homes here. You've got maintenance on the other hand, trying to gin up the entire fleet when you know these planes are not getting any younger. So you do that multiple times, week after week after week, and there are a lot of challenges to overcome. But we've made it work this year. But yeah, it's been several. We've evacuated the fleet while operating into storms 3 separate times.
Wow.
In about a 7-week period across August and September. And talking about multiple areas of responsibility, my first big trip this season was to Hawaii to fly Hurricane Douglas at the end of July. And I remember that week being, you know, kind of is this going to be how the season is going to go? Because I went to Hawaii with 3 airplanes, and we were also flying a storm off east, or in the East Pacific off the west coast of Mexico. And then we also had crews go to St. Croix to fly a system in the Atlantic, all at the same time. So the pace hasn't really slowed up, and it's been one thing after another, and a lot of, unfortunately, close to home.
Yeah,
so
and on top of that, oh yeah, there's a pandemic.
Yeah, we try not to talk about that. We've made it work. We're following CDC guidelines as best as possible. But we're human too. We've still had several people get sick.
Yeah, I hope they're doing okay. Right now you're working. Of course, you have a crew out in Charleston, South Carolina, working Epsilon, which is out there, and then there's something new brewing down in the Gulf, which you're kind of like, okay, we need a break, on this. But so that mission you would actually fly from Keesler, correct?
Yeah, we can fly. I think a lot of people would be surprised how far we can get from Keesler. So that system in the Western Caribbean, we can reach easily from home station here at Keesler in Biloxi. It really depends on how much time the Hurricane Center wants us to spend in the storm, and sometimes there's a trade-off. The benefit outweighs. If we stay at home station and spend less time in the storm, maybe they get more flights out of it versus having to relocate somewhere. And it's all a balance game of resources and what the Hurricane Center wants and needs. But yeah, Western Caribbean is easily reachable from home station.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about your mission and the things that you do. I want to talk a little bit about you real quick, but you've got a pretty good story yourself. You grew up in Pensacola. You survived Ivan and Katrina, which, it kind of reminds me of the movie Twister, where, suddenly she gets interested in weather because she watched her dad get sucked out of a door. Hopefully that your dad was a pilot and I take it he did okay. But that's what kind of launched you into going into meteorology. But what made you decide to become a pilot and a hurricane hunter too?
Yeah, I kind of had dueling passions, I guess, when I was a kid. We have a handful of pilots that have a meteorology background, but it's certainly not a prerequisite by any means. Most of our weather people are onboard weather officers and not pilots or navigators or loadmasters. But you see a lot of people with different weather backgrounds and different crew positions within the squadron here. Myself, yeah, I grew up in Pensacola. My dad was an Air Force pilot, now a commercial airline pilot. And yeah, the mid 2000s was a busy time in the tropics, on the Gulf Coast and really, in the Southeast. And so I had several of those events, and just being naturally into flying, a lot of people kind of enjoy watching the clouds out the window. When you're in an airplane, it's just a cool perspective on the world. So as I grew up and all those hurricanes started happening, it just kind of was a natural progression. I went to Florida State, studied meteorology. And rather than pursuing a career specifically in meteorology, I felt more inclined to pursue the aviation aspect of that. And I was even willing to give up anything professional weather related, just so I could fly. So to be able to end up at a unit like this that allowed me to kind of keep my toes in that, while getting to fly airplanes, it's really the best job in the world for me.
What'd your dad fly?
He flew B-1 bombers in the Air Force,
Wow.
and now flies commercial.
Yeah, but you get to fly C-130 now. That's like the world's best truck ever.
I do. It's like I don't know. It's tried and true for sure.
Yeah, I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, where they make the C-130. So they were always flying over the houses, and I got to ride in one time. They're pretty loud, but they're a great aircraft, and they're perfect for the mission that y'all have because they're just slow enough that you don't get beat up, and they're strong and can take a lot of punishment. Describe a little bit when you were flying, probably what was the most dramatic hurricane that you've flown through?
So this is my second season with the Hurricane Hunters. Every storm that I've flown has been different. I've had storms that I was expecting to be crazy, and they were very smooth, like Dorian, for example, last year, which is widely publicized. This year, my strongest storms, Laura, I flew the landfall Laura mission when it was a high-end Cat 4. And I would say the intensity did correlate with the ride a little bit, but you also have other factors like friction with the land as storms are making landfall and still intensifying. All that kind of goes into play. So Laura was definitely a benchmark this year, and probably my top one or two. Behind that, my second most, if not first most, most turbulent rather, this year was Tropical Storm Marco, which was the same week. We were flying Laura and Marco out of Charleston at the same time, and I flew Marco as a tropical storm. It was really struggling. It was trying to intensify into a hurricane, but the atmosphere was trying to tear it apart at the same time. Storms like that, no matter how weak they are, if there's a lot of other factors in play, it's just a rough ride. And so that was actually probably my roughest ride this year.
From what little flying I've done, generally you try to stay away from thunderstorms and stay away from storms, and here y'all fly into them. Tell people a little bit why your mission's so important. What are the things that you're doing? And I mean, kind of talk a little bit about the mission profile too.
Sure. So why it's important. Hurricanes tend to, and tropical systems just in general for that matter, are moving over areas where there's not a lot of data available. And so our main goal at baseline is to fill the gaps in the data chain for the forecasters and the Hurricane Center and emergency management officials to kind of paint a better picture. Satellites have advanced really far, and you can get a lot of great information from remote sensing capabilities of satellites and get a good idea of what's going on in a storm, but it's not going to be a perfect substitute for direct sensing data collection. And that's what we do. And the only way to do it is to fly directly into the storm and get all that information that you can only get with direct sensing. And so we fly as close to the surface as safely possible into the storm to get right to the very center, collecting data all the way in and all the way out to kind of paint that 3D picture with the most precise information in real time.
So you have 2 pilots and then a crew in the back of 3. And I've always loved, I've seen some of the videos where there's like these little tubes that you have a little chute and you drop them, they have little parachutes, and that's how you get the data, correct?
Yeah, we have a couple instruments on the airplane. We have what we call a Smurf. It's a pod underneath one of the wings. And that actually is what we would call remote sensing. It's measuring surface sea spray to get an idea of rainfall rates and surface wind speeds and patterns. But the real meat and potatoes of what we do is, like you said, dropping the drop sonde. It's about 1.5 feet long, very expensive tube that we shoot out of the bottom of the airplane. They're one-time use. And different parts of the storm, it's collecting pressure, wind data, humidity, temperature, etc., all the good stuff. And yeah, that's really the primary instrument that collects the information. And like you said, it has a little parachute on it, pops out, and goes all the way to the ocean surface.
You know, we mentioned the C-130, and I mean, this plane's been around since 1954. Of course, the new version of it is more modern. You have the glass cockpit and all the fancy things on it, but it's still a truck. But I mean, you're flying 11-hour missions, so it's kind of your little home away from home once you take off, right?
Yeah, it's I kind of think of it as an old RV. I mean, everybody's bringing coolers on board and pillows and whatnot. You know, not that we have time to sleep or anything during the flight, but we try and bring extra crew members when it's possible. So we'll have a third pilot to support a little bit of crew rest at different points in the flight. And sometimes if we carry extra people on board, you know, there's a lot of room in the back because it is a cargo plane. And so there are opportunities to rest. But yeah, food is the primary cargo that I bring with me. I've always got 2 or 3 meals on hand, lots of snacks, and you just kind of settle in. It's like a long road trip.
What do you, I mean, you're a co-pilot now, and so what's your future goals? I mean, what do you hope to be doing as your career progresses?
Sure. Well, natural progression would be next step for me would be aircraft commander, which is probably not too far off. But you know, from there, it's just continuing to gain additional duties within the squadron, and you know, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that when our aircrew members are not in the airplane physically flying or navigating or looking at weather data, they're on the ground supporting the mission in some other facet, be it mission commander or anything you can think of that drives the mission behind the scenes on the ground. Our aircrew are doing those jobs in addition to their flying duties. So moving more into that realm as I continue to learn the airplane and take on more responsibility, aircraft commander, those are the things that I'm looking forward to.
One of the things, a lot of people hear hurricane hunters, and of course that's your nickname, but also NOAA has a mission also where they fly another Lockheed product. They fly the P-3 Orion into the storms. And then I think they have a Gulfstream too, where they fly real high up. What's the difference between their mission and your mission?
So at baseline, their mission is more research driven. They have more gadgets, more radars. They have 3 different radars on board the P-3, one in the tail cone, one underneath the fuselage, and one in the nose. And they have more crew members on board, more computers, more gadgets. And the idea is they're collecting a different set of information that's not necessarily aimed at the real-time forecast. It's
Right.
more about developing future computer models and more analysis-driven type of a mission, as opposed to our goal is more get the meat and potatoes of the data in real time, get that to the hurricane center. That said, the P3 is capable of supporting that mission when need be. Sometimes there's logistical issues where we're trying to move locations and we need a P3 to go to hit a storm at a certain time to kind of fill a data gap. And they can certainly do that. The Gulf Stream is a little bit different. Their mission is solely high altitude, and they're primarily focused with sampling the atmosphere at high altitudes ahead of the storm environment. Just like there are data gaps in the storm out over the middle of the ocean at high altitude, there's still a lot that needs to be filled in as well. And if the models get a better handle on what the atmosphere is doing 1,000 miles ahead of the storm over the open ocean at 40,000 feet, that plays into the forecast just as much as the data that we provide does.
I've read where the work that you do increases the accuracy by at least 20%, maybe higher on that. And I guess after Katrina, I really wanted to say thank you for that, because it's really, you see the forecast now, and it's like Delta, for instance. Delta was almost exactly spot on. I mean, the forecast, all the models, everything were perfect. And a lot of that had to be because of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. And it's true. Without doing what we do, it would be a much tougher forecast for the ladies and gentlemen that do that. And so we're happy to do it. It's not a perfect science, though. I mean, this year's been really tough. There have been with coronavirus and whatnot, there have been a lot of information missing. There's less air traffic in the air, and that plays a role too. And for whatever reason, the models have not done all that well this year in many cases. That's not our job. That's not what we do. Our goal is to provide information to help make that better. But, Sally was a good example. Threw a lot of people off, and there have been several storms where, it just didn't look like anything was going to materialize. And 2 days later, we're out flying a storm somewhere. So it's an evolving thing that we're learning every day and just doing our part to help make that better.
Back, I guess, a few years ago, I interviewed one of your cohorts who flew through Ivan and when it made landfall. And his description of that moment was that the plane was shaking so hard he couldn't read the instruments. And I was just like, and he said, and I had family down there too. And so that made it even more nerve-wracking on that. I would think that by the time that your wheels are back on the ground, you're ready for a nap.
Yeah, that's an understatement, especially when you're landing from an overnight flight. This year, I feel like personally, I've had a lot of overnight flights where you're taking off at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and you're not landing until after the sun comes up, and that's rough, especially when there are just a minimum crew on board. But that's part of what we do, and it is taxing when you're in the storm. Laura was a good example I'll go back to. I flew that. We took off from Charleston before sunset, and we landed right around sunrise. And we went through the eye wall 12 separate times overnight. And there were times when, at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're going through the eye wall, and there were just two of us pilots on that flight. And at that point, the adrenaline kicks in, and it's just get through it. But then once you get out of the storm and you start to see the light on the horizon, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're just completely drained. It's exhausting. I'm not going to lie.
I know the C-130's wings will flex. They'll flap a little bit when you're going through some really rough turbulence. It's a tough airplane. But when you're punching through that eye wall, that has to be so incredible, though, when you get to see that stadium effect of the clouds. And, I've seen it on TV and I've seen it in pictures. You're seeing it through this giant greenhouse. Tell us what that's like. That has to be almost like a God moment.
Yeah, it's humbling for sure. I
Yeah.
have not seen many of the perfect textbook stadium eyes. It's actually not as common as you would think. This year, especially, a lot of the storms haven't been as um, I don't know, pretty, if you want to use that word.
Yeah.
They've been a little bit more messy. You look at storms. Epsilon was a good example. We had the crews flying out of Charleston, Epsilon, in the last few days. They took some pictures. It just happened to be a daytime flight where the eye was perfectly clear. And you don't get that as often. Laura was completely clear, and I wish I could have gotten some pictures of that. It was at night. The moon was shining just enough with stars above, and you could see lightning flashes lighting up the stadium around you. And no camera was ever going to catch that. I didn't get any opportunities during the day to catch that, but the few times that it happens in your career, and some people, for some of our part-timers who don't do this every day, but they contribute, through the season over the years, they only get a few of those in their entire career. And so when it happens, you punch through the eye, you take care of business, but you also take a few moments to appreciate what you're seeing.
Well, thank you for taking a few moments to talking with us today, and I really appreciate you doing that. And a lot of people in Mississippi don't realize that we have, such a national, not to sound corny, but a treasure, because I think what you do is so incredibly important here, right here in the state, right down at Keesler. And y'all been there, I guess it's 73. I guess it was after Camille they put you in there, and we're very grateful for what you do, and thank you for spending the time today. And like I said, the technical issues we had earlier, I appreciate your patience on that. But I really enjoyed getting to talk to you today.
Same. We appreciate the support of the local community here in the state of Mississippi. We are truly blessed.
All right, thank you so much. Lieutenant Ryan Smithies, of course, was a hurricane hunter. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.